Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Got no manuscript today, which means normally I'd love to just be walking up and down the aisles, but I don't want to miss out on our folks worshiping with us online, so I'm blocked to the podium a little bit. So to recap a little bit, for the last month, I've been talking about what it means to be Methodist. And it started when we heard from the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus asking Peter at Caesarea Philippi, "Who do you say that I am?" And I'm sure everybody's got this by now. Peter turned to Jesus and said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." That proclamation, the same proclamation that we make here 2,000 years later, is probably the most succinct definition of a Christian. One who declares that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ. However, throughout the very, very, very many years since Jesus was crucified, there have been a lot of different traditions, times, ways that we've understood what that proclamation means and how we should respond to it. For some of our people, they experience that proclamation as issuance of a judgment of the law, or like our Calvinist brethren, it's something to be proclaimed with due reverence and diligence, right? I mean no slight by it, but that's where we get the phrase, the frozen chosen, right? For some of our brethren, like the folks downstairs, our Pentecostal folks, the proclamation comes with a spirit of exuberance and enthusiasm, a spirit of fire, right? For us, for the Methodists, our tradition, our particular tradition, I have been arguing, I have been telling you, I think it finds its essence in a fourfold movement. We proclaim that Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, with joy. That joy that we experience leads to gratitude. Gratitude leads to generosity of spirit. And part of what that generosity entails is service of others. That is the Wesleyan Methodist way. That is our response to the proclamation. And John Wesley declared many, many times that he did not feel that he was making anything new up. He didn't think that he was adding something to the Bible. And I kind of agree with him. I think that what Wesley taught us and what we've continued to keep as our tradition is very, 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 very authentic to the Scriptures. And what we have before us here in Matthew today is a good example. In the parable, in this story, there's a vineyard and a landowner. And interestingly enough, this is what I was jotting down as I was reminded, I was just remembering. Frequently in the Bible, vineyards represent joy. So isn't it interesting that this story takes place in a vineyard, the place of joy? And the landowner goes out, and like a general contractor today, he drives to the back of Home Depot, where a bunch of day laborers have gathered, hoping that someone will pull up and looking for workers for a job. And I guess this landowner was kind of bad at his job because he didn't get enough people the first time. So he got a couple folks in the morning, and contracted with them to pay him a fair wage, a normal wage. And then he realized that he didn't have enough workers, so he went back to the Home Depot, got a couple more, and then he realized he still didn't have enough workers, so he went back again. And he made a final trip when the job was almost over, the day was almost over, and picked those folks up too. And when it came time for the work to be done, he paid everybody the same. And what happened? What happened in the vineyard? What happened in this place of joy? There wasn't much joy anymore. Or, I would say, there was a crisis of gratitude. Right? The people, these workers, began to turn against each other, saying, that's what the scripture said, why would you treat them as if they are equal to me? I've been here working all day. This person showed up at 5 o'clock. He was barely on the job for half an hour before the shift bell rang. Last week, I mentioned the work of a man named Bill Connolly, who I cannot praise his scholarship enough. And I told you he articulated something that has stuck with me so powerfully. I preach it everywhere I go in the connection. And there's something about the human spirit. I think this is a critical part of what we do, why we church, right? And I'm using church here as a verb. Why we church is because there is a fundamental war for the human soul. And it doesn't take place between most of the usual differences that we identify in order to divide people up. It takes place between, these are Bill's words, presumptive generosity and resentment. Presumptive generosity and resentment. In our story in the vineyard, in the place of joy, when it came time, when the shift was over, resentment snuck in. And the people began grumbling about the landowner and about what we thought we deserved. Now, I've also told you, at various points in the last couple of months, we've looked at the structure of the New Testament, when things were written, some of the big theological issues that were at stake. And I've told you that the number one big theological conflict that is raging in the background of all of these books of the New Testament is the question about whether Gentiles can be included in God's promises. And I see that here, I hear that in the background of this story, right? God's chosen people, the Israelites, the Hebrews that have been brought out of Egypt, these are the promised people. These are the chosen ones. These are the children of Abraham who have been laboring in the hot sun and the persecution, following the laws of God in the face of empire and slavery. And here comes this man, Jesus, this teacher, who says, actually, God is generous enough to include more. God is generous enough to give grace to people coming in at the end of the shift. And I am going to treat them as if they are equal to you. Us here today, in that big sweep, that theological sweep, you and I are the day laborers coming in at 5 p.m. We are the ones, you and I mean us literally in this room. We are not, in this story, we are not the ones who have been laboring from the beginning. We are the ones who, by the grace of God, get to partake in the promise we get to be part of the people, even though we've barely done anything. And we don't really deserve it. So I return to these fourfold Methodist points where I don't know when I'm going to stop preaching about them because it just seems to keep coming up. I don't pick these scripture passages. I follow the lectionary. And here we have the vineyard, joy. We have resentment, a lack of gratitude. We have God declaring God's generosity. Do I not have the right to be generous? And our Methodist proclamation is that, as I've told you from that tract, The Character of a Methodist, Wesley said, the method is to walk as Christ walked. And so if God is generous, we must be generous. I think it's radically important. It's not just a proclamation. It's one of, not to derail too much, but in ethics, there are two frames to think about ethics. The deontological, which means de from ontological being, right? Which really means duty. You do something out of duty. It's the law, you do it. You follow the rules. And then there's the utilitarian or consequentialist mode, which is you do it because it produces good things. This whole generosity thing, I think, qualifies for both. You do it because it's what we're called to do. It is the fulfillment of the law. Love God, love your neighbor. You do it because that's your job, right? If you are a Christian, if you are declaring and proclaiming that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, being generous is your job. But I also think it makes the world a better place. It makes our relationships better. It makes us a more healthy people. It reduces abuse. When we can say no to that grumbling spirit, when we can say no to that resentment that crops up, when we say no to, why are you treating them as if they're equal to me? Then the world becomes more beautiful. It's how we build the kingdom. Anyways, I don't have anything more to say about that today. You can tune back in next week for a regular scheduled programming. At this time, I'd invite you to stay seated. We got Kevin. Kevin Phelps, everybody. Come on, let's give him a hand. You gonna tell us a little bit about what you're gonna sing for us?
I guess I thought about switching a couple times, but I won't.
Do too.
I'll just talk about that message a little bit because, you know, as long as I've been living a life of faith, there have been people. As long as I've been living a life of faith, there's been people who've been doing it a lot longer than me, and maybe they deserve more, and there's people that come in after me, and maybe they deserve less. But it's not really about what any of us deserve. It's about how gracious God is for letting us be part of this community of sharing and community of grace with each other. And that's really what it's about, and it's just about walking. We sang a song earlier, Oh Master, walk with thee, so I'm not going to go too hillbilly today. This is more of a traditional song, just a closer walk with thee. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. In this when my feeble life is o'er, and time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to the shore, dear Lord, to the shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be.